Good morning, everyone. We're almost at a quorum. We'll give people like 1 or 2 more minutes to join. All right. Let's get started and hopefully the stragglers will show up soon. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you here. Let's do a quick check-in. I think most everyone I saw sort of respond to the personal remarks I made on your project proposals. Are there any questions or lingering issues that you wanted to address right now? Hi, cool.
Hi, good morning.
Is anyone really confused or wanting to find partners that now would be a good time to talk about it? So am I understanding that those of you who had projects that were not partnered in the email I had sent, you prefer to stay unpartnered? Is that true? Bueller, anyone? It's not like a forever hold your peace, but I think now is a really good time to cement who you're working with on this project. So let me just open it up so we can have.
Oh, wait,
Okay.
Dr. Cosby.
Yeah.
Were we supposed to send you our redo proposal?
It wasn't due yet. It's coming up on, I believe, or was it Tuesday night, like tonight? I think that was the due
Oh, okay, got it.
time. Yeah, but I wanted to make sure that the partnerships were talked about here. So I proposed that, so Kiona and Shauna had already indicated that they want to work together. I think Darsh, Rishi, and Logan can partner potentially, but Logan can also partner with Sanat. And then the people left over with no partners are Ananya, Arya, Yoshida, and Angie. And the question to them was whether they wanted to change the project they're working on, or they're super committed to the project and therefore not necessarily interested in partnering with somebody else. Or, they can partner with somebody else and identify a way to merge the project somehow. So I'll just point blank ask Angie. Angie, are you more committed to finishing this project that you've identified, which I like? Actually, it's a well-framed problem. So anybody who's iffy on your framing of your proposal, you can join Angie. Or Angie, are you interested in potentially partnering with somebody else?
I'd say I'm interested in working on my own proposal for now.
Okay. And then the next person I'll ask is Yoshida. Which we have two Yoshidas today, so maybe they'll partner together. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all good. So are
Device.
you, so your project is actually pretty, I like it. I think we can scope it to something that's reasonable. So for those of you who are interested, Yoshida proposed to understand the equity in routing and directions applications. And one way to do that is evaluate how accessible routes are provided, like if and whether accessible routes are provided by Google, Here, TomToms, and how that compares to the routes suggested by a product like AccessMap, which actually uses the information on the ground about where the sidewalks are and what's on those sidewalks to provide people with more accessible suggestions. I wouldn't say it's entirely, like it doesn't have all the information, for example, about where all the accessible pedestrian signals are. So we don't have access to that data, but you can actually add on to that data if you like. So this project would be about sort of selecting 100 really high importance routes, and we can define what that means, right? And compare what Google gives you for that, what Here gives you for that, what TomToms give you for that, and then what you get from AccessMap, and then do a comparative analysis of like how much longer is the accessible route for this particular profile, and what did Google get wrong, what did Here get wrong, etc. So this is something that people are often wondering about different cities, like how much longer do people have to go in order to identify to actually get the accessible route? Like, is it just a matter of 2 or 3 extra blocks to actually have fully curb ramped routes, or do I need to literally like go 5 extra miles just to have an accessible route? So if anyone is interested in joining Yoshida, now is a great time to do that. Okay. And Yoshida, are you pretty committed to this project?
Yeah, so if
Okay.
I'm fine with anyone joining, but if not, then I would like to go by myself.
Okay. All right. So same question to Ananya and Arya is, are they here is the question as well. Yes, I see it, Ananya.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So Ananya, I love the approach. I struggle with your question a little bit. It's really big. So you and I and maybe Cole should meet just to identify a way to get it to a scope that's manageable.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to you doing it by any means. I worry that we'll have a hard time finding good data you can use, and like
Yeah.
data that's co-located, because you have a lot of data dependencies both on the community participation side as well as like the history of infrastructure development side. And so I am not aware of those data sets just off the top of my head, so we'll have to do some research.
Right.
Um,
I was hoping for maybe another couple of days to at least check to see if I could find some good data, and then
yeah,
if not, maybe I
that's
could pivot or join another group if they need
sounds
partners.
good. Okay, that sounds like a good plan. I
Thank
just, I want to set everybody up for success.
Yeah, I
So so I don't want you or anybody else to feel like they got, misled into a spot that they can't sort of find their way out of.
Definitely.
Um, okay,
Alright,
cool.
thank you.
All right, well then in that case, we can, oh, Shauna has a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Kiona and I found a bunch of data sets that fit our question, but we're not really sure how to approach the write-up part of it and like how we're supposed to analyze the data set.
Yeah, that's gonna come next for sure.
Okay.
So once, yeah, so you're ready to write everything up, but I think we'll go kind of step by step and identify sort of our intended rubric for the analysis, and this is where the next 2 sessions or the next 3 sessions actually are going to be really important. Cole is going to walk us through some of the different types of analyses that we can do with those data sets. Like how to do joins is really important because all your projects require some level of joining of data sets. Sorry, yeah. So I think we should all listen up to Cole for the next 3 sessions. And once we have the tools in our toolbox, then we can actually come up with an action plan on how to take these data and how to combine them in ways that make sense, that are transparent, that are all the good things that we talked about last time regarding doing scaling things appropriately, not aggregating things in inappropriate ways and things like that. But good question.
Then like for the homework redo part that's due today, should we just leave that part blank or
Why blank?
like
Oh,
'cause
I'd like you to
instead for
sort
the
of
homework.
hypothesize on how you would go about it, and so that would start out our working plan, right? So
Okay.
the tools after today's lecture, you'll have some idea around, what are good and not so great things to do with your data, and then that will give you sort of a more sort of bird's eye view of what are the tools you'd have access to and how now you can then think about how to organize your data analysis in such a way as to answer the question that you posed. So that's what I'm hoping to get, like sort of your initial response to like, how will you do this, right?
All right, thank you.
Oh, so is that what you were asking, like how to write that up?
Yeah.
Oh, just,
Yeah.
to say, I will take this data set that we found and describe the data set. So, because if we're not familiar with it, we don't know what's there. And you can say, oh, and it gives me a racial social equity index per census tract. I will take this other data set that is also per census tract and join them along the census tract number, right? So if the census tracts match each other, I will join those 2 rows in the data. And now I will have information for the census tract, both for the racial social equity index and population disaggregated by race, for example, right? So that's like step 2 in your process. Step 3 would then be to look at correlates between, these like 3 bins in the racial social equity index and 3 bins in the racial diversity makeup, and look at the correlations in those. Something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
That'll also give me a better idea of what types of operations people are doing, so I can know which ones to write out tutorials for. So
yeah, cool. All right, I think are there other questions before we launch into the message? Okay, take it away, Cole.
let's make sure I got all this up. Wade. Okay, so we're gonna kind of cover a couple different things today that are all related, but they might seem a little bit disparate when we get started. So we're going to cover data models. We're going to cover how to work with the attribute table in QGIS. And we're going to cover some things to be careful of when classifying and aggregating data all in one here. So we'll start with talking about data models. So there are two sort of main data models that you're probably going to encounter at this level. And they are vector and raster data models. And they're a little bit different. But I think most of us probably already have a good idea of what the characteristics and differences are. So vector model is what you've probably been working with the most so far. That's features like this. So there are points, polylines, and polygons. They're very coordinate-based systems, coordinates and vertices. And they're usually discrete data. So that means that they're not, they have very firm edges. You're in the shape where you're not. Like I said, there are points, lines, and polygons for geometry. And this slide that I keep going to shows those three. The advantage of vector models is that they take really a pretty small amount of space to store, but the data structure is not cellular, so it's significantly more complicated than raster data. But like I said, it is small. It's much easier to store shape boundaries than cells for each cell of a raster or each pixel of a raster. There's also very high spatial precision. As you can see, there's no fuzzy edges. I mean, there's lines that are either again discrete. They either are, they are not. These work better for networks, right? Because road and sidewalk data is naturally in this polyline format that I think we can all recognize. And then there are vector topology and connectivity that you don't have with rasters. So that means that shapes can be connected to each other and have different arrangements relative to each other. So, like I said, the three main vector model feature types are point features, polylines, and polygons. And each of these features has attributes similar to what we've been seeing in the attribute table for data that we've been looking at. Again, that attribute table is very that's dealing with vector models more than raster models. So there are some dialogues that go with vector models in QGIS. So when you go to that layer panel and you right click on the layer and then click properties at the bottom of the dialog, right? You'll get a different dialog box depending on what kind of data it is. And so since most of the data you're working with is vector, you're mostly going to get the vector properties dialog. And some of this we've talked about a little bit already. But I think there's three kind of main important subcategories inside that vector dialog are the source, which is where you can find that information on the coordinate reference system that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And also to build SQL queries to filter your data. You can also change how features are labeled. In a more advanced cartography class, you would probably go over how and why things are labeled how they are. We're not going to go over that here, but you're welcome to play around with it if you'd like. It's a pretty extensive tool set, I think much more so than ArcGIS actually. And then symbology is probably the most important one. And that's changing how features are symbolized or represented on the map. And I have some direct links there for the slides that will be shared with you. But there are, for vector data, there are kind of 4 main symbology methods that are represented in the vector properties dialog. You can either have the same symbol for all of the features, you could have them categorized by some sort of rule, or they can be graduated, meaning that that's kind of a ranges from one color to another based on the field value, and then also rule-based symbology. There are pretty extensive tutorials at that link for you to check out. And we're going to come back to that sort of in just a minute about consequences of using different types of symbology inside each of those groupings of symbology options. Raster models. So raster models are the other type of data you're going to run into. These are basically what a picture is, right? You have rows and columns of cells. Each cell can be a pixel or represents some sort of data value. So they have cell dimensions or pixels. It's a simpler data structure, but the storage requirements are large. This is why, pictures take up so much more space than text or vector files like SVGs, because the raster requirements are much, much larger. And the precision of the data, unlike vector data, which is at the same precision no matter what the scale, the precision of raster data is largely based on its cell size. So like when things get pixelated, when you zoom in on an image too much, that's the cell size getting relatively too large. And so you begin to lose the detail of your data if your cell size gets too large. So something to be careful of in elevation data, for example, is raster data often. This is usually continuous data. So data like elevation, elevation isn't yes or no or binary or on or off. It sort of ranges from one value to the other. So continuous data. And these are easier to do overlay operations with than vector models in terms of computation. And I don't think conceptually they are, but I think that operation-wise, they're easier and less intensive to do than and raster data, you're not going to, I think most of the data we're working with so far in this course is vector data. So I have the documentation for the raster properties dialog, which is the same as that vector properties dialog, just for raster layers. And that's accessed the same way. Moving on to not data models, but data formats. I should have talked about this a while ago, but these are the data, some of the common data formats that you're probably going to start running across looking for data. I have them grouped here by what type of data they are. So we'll just go over these briefly, but you can return to this chart. Or usually just looking them up, you can find some more information. So the 2 main vector formats that you're going to come across are GeoJSON and shapefiles. So GeoJSON is kind of one, that's what we use for a lot of web-based mapping. And it's one file that contains a vector layer. It's harder to create some types of spatial index with GeoJSON files, I have found in QGIS. I don't know if that's always the case, but that has certainly been my experience. I've had a little bit of trouble with those. fortunately, it is also just one file. It is compact. The next is the Esri shape file, which is the most common vector format. And that will show up as a .shp. But if you go back and navigate to where your shape files are, you'll see that there's about 6 other files that come with them. And these are DVF. They all do different things. One of them is a projection file. One of them is a data interoperability file. And if you move shapefiles around and you forget those files, your whole shapefile will get corrupted. So that's the one disadvantage to those, is that they're a little harder to keep track of. There's KML is the other vector layer, and that's keyhole markup language. And that's often what's used for Google Earth. It's an XML format. XML is sort of a web, kind of like HTTP. But if you're using files from Google Earth, which I don't think that anyone is here, you'll run into KML files. For raster files, we have the most common you're going to run into is the TIFF file. And that's data that's taken, that's also known as the GeoTIFF. And that's data that's usually taken from satellites and other remote sensing technology. So any satellite imagery you get is that's in raster format, is going to be probably a GeoTIFF file. There's also .img files, and those show up in other places than just spatial uses. And that's just a simple raster file.
Yeah, I was gonna not interrupt you till the end, but I was gonna ask everybody a question. So,
yeah.
But go ahead and finish the descriptions and then.
Okay. And then there's 2 database files that are common. One of them is the GeoPackage, which you've probably run into. I'm not so familiar with that. I haven't used those so heavily, but they seem like they're a good way to keep a lot of files that are different kinds in one kind of mobile database. The one I am more familiar with is the Esri file geodatabase, or the GDB. And it's a container for multiple data sets, much like the GeoPackage. The GeoPackages generally can store different types of projections all at the same time, and the GDBs can't. However, the GDB files are a lot easier to move large amounts of data around, in my opinion. I haven't figured out how to use the GeoPackages to move large amounts of data around. The GDB you'll probably run into more if you use ArcGIS, and probably less so in QGIS. So I think that's all I have for this slide.
Cool. Okay, so Darsh, if I have an aerial satellite or so imagery of my city, what kind of file do you think I would like to contain it in?
I think you might want to do like a KML, because won't that get you like a satellite view?
So a KML has an XML format. Are you familiar with XML at all?
No, I'm not.
So it's like a tagged type format. You have these hierarchical structures, and you'll say, okay, now the region is King County, the municipality is Redmond, the bounding box of what I'm interested. So you go in this hierarchical structure, and then you can describe like a specific layer under those hierarchical structures. So XML is actually a really good way to kind of hierarchically describe GIS data, and that's why it's a vector type format, because you can kind of index things, right? When I think of vectorizing things, I think oh, for once I find the index I'm interested in, I have like this line of attributes that describe that location or that, region or that county or, those, that's how you vectorize information. So if I have an image that I haven't yet processed, like I just get this image, all I know is these are the coordinates this image came from. What is an appropriate way to keep that information?
It'd be a S3 shapefile.
An Esri shapefile that, again, it goes to vectorizing it, so it implies that I mean, you could put it in an Esri shapefile, but my point is,
It'd be better to
when you
keep it in
take
a
it, when you take
database.
actually raster, because what happens when you take a picture of something, whether it's LiDAR or a CCD
Wait, so
camera
geotip
or
is the best.
geotip is what's typically used for satellite sensing. And that's so I mentioned an aerial LiDAR satellite imagery
Does
is what I
geotip
was
kind of
looking for.
tell it how to map the image?
No, actually, it's a georeferenced, like just matrix of rows and columns of pixels and the intensity. In this case, when I describe LiDAR, that's like the altitude that the laser beam basically hit the earth, right? So it can tell you the distance from essentially the camera that was taking these images and is able to translate it to an elevation. So basically for every box in this matrix that I'm describing, you'll get an elevation information. So, and that's how the data is organized, right? Once you do some kind of machine learning on it, you do some segmentation, you do some kind of hand annotation, however you end up grouping things together, then you're able to potentially provide a vector style shapefile that has maybe the outlines of the different shapes inside this satellite image and how you label it. You can label, block information and then roads and then sidewalks, which is what we typically do and things like that. And that would go into either a vector format or a database.
Got it.
Does that make sense? So anytime you just sensed something and you sensed it in a kind of grid-like formation, that is raster. And that's kind of the big difference between raster and either a vector or a database type of file format. Does anybody have questions about that? So here's a tough question. There's this really cool project called Array of Things, and they create these nodes that are static, like they sit in one place on the top of a building, and they have 40 different sensors in there for toxins, air pollution, noise pollution, level of UV exposure, like all kinds of things, 40 different sense items. And they repeatedly sense their environment for those things, and they take that data and they send it to the cloud where the data gets organized. The city of Seattle at one point bought 500 such nodes and they dispersed them across the city and not necessarily in a grid-like formation. How would you contain that data? So it's every node has GPS location, right? So you know where that data came from. Every time that it senses it, like basically every half a minute, it sends more information to the cloud. So you have a timestamp on the information. And then you have the sensed information from these 40 different sensors for that time point, for that location. How would you best organize that, Sanat?
Would this be a database and something like in the geodatabase?
Great I would definitely do that in a database because I probably want to take that data and separate it out into the different sensors, right? Not necessarily grouping the toxins with the noise pollution, because that's not necessarily how I would want to access that data downstream. So I would probably organize it in a geodatabase. Thank you. If I wanted to be really cheap on the data analysis or the machine learning part of things, I might do what would I so not I'll keep asking you because
Mhm.
what if I didn't want to separate things out? I was just gonna take each one of these
Use
timestamps
GeoJSON then?
geolocated. GeoJSON. So the difficulty with GeoJSON is that it requires a geometry. I guess it's a point location. You could use a GeoJSON.
Then would the better one be a geo package?
GeoPackage, that's actually exactly where GeoPackages can come in handy. We use GeoPackages in our lab to describe like an entire transportation network and additional layers that are related to it. Uh, the Meta team at Facebook uses geo packages to describe different layers that they're aware of, like the pedestrian layer, and then the they call it the financial layer. It's like all these businesses, and so then you can use the geo package to do spatial joins of like, oh, this person is on this part of the pedestrian network, and here are all the businesses that are near them. Let's shoot them a bunch of ads to go visit these locations, right? Like that's essentially what they do with these geo packages that they have out there, dispersing information that is GIS based. Okay, I think, let me think of any other questions that I had. There is a data format out there that is actually all about 3D modeling of cities, but it's also hierarchical. So you start out by saying, okay, this is the municipality of Redmond, like we said before, and here are all the buildings that are found here. And now I'll give you a bunch of hierarchical lists of the buildings. And then you have like a, well, I'll give you a little hint. You have a model of the buildings, so you know how many flights they are. You actually have like basically a drawing of the building. Then you have underneath that, hierarchically, you can separate them out into each of the levels in each building. So you know the floor plans in each building, and then the specific rooms with hierarchically underneath that. How do you think those get described? First of all, can you rule out any data format for that? What would you really not do for for such a hierarchical description of a city? Anyone?
I'm thinking probably not raster.
Totally, right? Like that's just if all you got is raster, now I have to go probe every single voxel in this huge space of the earth to identify if it's got the thing I am looking for. So not raster. Thank you. Where would you go next? Do you think it's more vectorized or is it a database? Arya.
I would say it's more vectored and maybe it could be the keyhole markup.
Yeah, KML is one of the types that has been used in this context because it's XML formatted. The format I'm thinking of is actually called City GML, but it's heavily based on KML. Exactly. Thank you. And it's essentially an XML format for cities. So describe it. So KML is just generically structured as this XML hierarchical structure, and City GML is just a it gives you like keywords and specific tags to use within the context of this format. Cool, thank you. All right, I know I didn't want to beat this to death, but just giving some examples really helps people kind of think about how information is organized in this way. And it actually makes a lot of difference later when you do your analytics or when you use machine learning algorithms to learn from these data, because the way they're organized will impact heavily what you can actually do with that information and how you can use statistical models to learn anything from that. Sorry, Cole, I didn't mean to interject all this, but I thought it would be
No, it's good to have some
for
examples.
people. Cool. Thank you.
And you know, there are 1,000 other formats too, but these are the most common ones for you to know. All right, so covered that. Let's see. So again, for the shapefiles, don't forget all the other shapefile parts because they're important. All right, now we're going to talk about classification. So classification is different from symbology because symbology is, you know, kind of what colors you're choosing and how you choose which is, well, that's not very that's not very eloquent. What would you say the difference between symbology and classification is, Anat?
Sorry. Yeah. So a couple of things. First, with classification, you can arbitrarily make up classes, right? Like for the population, for instance, where it's white versus gray versus black was decided upon by someone. And so when you have this like low, medium, high type of classification, the binning size and type is decided on by some human who made that distinction that high is 2156 to 5133. You know, how you make those decisions makes a huge difference, right? Because it could actually impact what the resulting mapping would look like. The symbology part is different in the sense that you're identifying ways to use symbols visually to describe maybe a class, but maybe just an item. So the symbology part is just the visual representation of something and how it takes shape in the context of a map. The classification has to do with really important and potentially responsible decisions on how you bin and glum information together. And of course, Paul is going to get further into this. Now, the reason we care about this, particularly when we talk about responsible AI, is once we determine what those classes are, do we determine that, or do we allow the machine learning algorithms to identify how to, what are the natural classes that have fallen into place here? And that's a huge question with machine learning and AI in particular, because sometimes you allow statistical processes to define those classes, and other times you kind of decree, how much variance you want to see across different classes. So that's going to make a big difference in terms of how your analysis looks and what you aggregate, what type of information you aggregate together.
Yep.
Did that answer your question?
Oh, that was just, I was just having a brain fart about what the difference between classification and symbology was.
Oh, sorry, I went on and on. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Careful what you ask for, Cole. Thank you.
So there's kind of three basic options you're gonna see, and there's some variations on each of these, right? So the first one is equal interval. So that means that of all the different attribute values that you have, you're just gonna divide them up. You're just gonna divide their range up into categories. So you might say from 0 to 5, from 5 to 10, from 10 to 15, from 15 to 20, right? And you can see a visualization of that on the map, even though there are significantly less values at the higher end. It's just that each interval is just the same. There's equal area classification, where each category that you have is set to cover an equal area on the map. So you'll notice that on the map in that center one, about the equal amount of the map is covered by black versus gray versus white. As you can see in the histogram there, the intervals, right, are now not the same. There's the black interval is much larger. The gray interval is the smallest, and then you have the white interval there. The third option is called natural breaks. And where the breaks are in the categories is subject to different algorithms depending on which subcategory of natural breaks you're using. And just natural breaks, generally, you just try to break them up into clusters. So it's kind of hard to describe that non-abstractly, but if you were to say, you would say, I want to break it up into clusters where the least squared difference is the smallest within the cluster, and the largest between clusters. So you might end up with clusters that look like what we have there. Each category covers an interval of minimal sum of squares differences. So that's kind of your third option. The first two are used often, but oftentimes for things that look better, the natural breaks are used. But there are reasons to use that category as well, depending on what subcategory of natural breaks you're using. So this is what we were talking about with implications of classification. So all these show the same data, all these charts. But how they're classified is different. So the top two don't really follow our rule. The bottom two have equal interval classes, and then also quartile classes. So that is divided up into quartiles of data. And then on the left, there's one that is a natural breaks clustering. And sometimes you can figure out where the best place is to put breaks in your data by visualizing them as a histogram, like in these pictures, or a number line to see where the outliers are. But oftentimes outliers are what's can skew your classification a lot. And so there isn't necessarily a right way to do this. There are times when choosing equal interval or equal area is better than the other. When exactly that is, cartographers have different theories about. So it's not always consistent. So this is why there's so much in GIS. There's technical skills, but there's also an art to cartography and map representation. Now we're going to talk about the MALP problem. So this is the most famous problem in GIS science, and it's the modifiable aerial unit problem. And what this basically says is that the units that you choose to aggregate your vector data will affect the statistics that you gather. This is how a way that people can either use maps to horrifically misrepresent things, or for people to just not spot that trends might not be as strong as they think they are. So there are two aspects of the MALP problem. There's the scale effect, which if you see those purple squares, that's a good representation of the scale effect. So the aggregation level can affect aggregate statistics. So you can just see that you get different clustering in terms of, like that top right square, right, is kind of a medium purple when it's aggregated large, but as you can see, when you break it apart, it's really all clustered into one subcorner of that box. The other is called the zonal effect, and that's what these other two pictures are. The one on the right it shows that based on where you draw your line, you'll get two different breakdowns. You'll either get, an illness rate of 50% if you put two of them in one box and one in the other, or an illness rate of 100% if you put one in one box and two in the other. But I mean, you could use that to tell two very different stories, right? You say, half of counties in the state have, let's see. I can't actually think of a good example of that off the top of my head. The other one presents a way that we do see often, and that is political boundaries, right? Voting boundaries. So you can see how if we have people that are represented by those little dots and which way they vote, the way that you draw the districts can decide who wins. So that is one of the largest consequences of this MELP problem, and why political parties, when they're in office, try to redraw political boundaries, because they know from some basic spatial science that based on where they draw the boundaries, they can affect what amount of votes that they need to win. So very, very real consequences. Looking more at implications and consequences. So one of the big papers on this was published in 1984. And the author of that paper says the aerial units used in many studies are arbitrary, modifiable, and subject to the whims and fancies of whoever is doing the aggregating. So this is an example they use in the paper. They break Iowa voting, and the percentage of elderly people that live in an area. And they say, what's the correlation between these two things? Based on where you draw the boundaries, you can get that correlation coefficient to vary from negative 0.9 to positive 0.9. That is crazy. And that is a very, very extreme example. And this is related to the ecological fallacy that you may have heard of, which is that characteristics of a group can be attributed to individuals. Not always the case. But there are some tests to sort of compensate against this problem. And one of them is to just test at different aggregation levels and see, how much your correlation coefficients change. That's called sensitivity testing. There's a good journal article on it right there. But there is not necessarily a catch-all solution to this problem. And it's something that people struggle with often. And if you're not skeptical, it's a trap that you could pretty easily fall into. So it's important to state what your assumptions are about where aggregation lines are, why those are your assumptions, and to test for if you're getting a complete outlier result. Usually you can't get such crazy differences like that Iowa redistricting issue. But that can happen if you force it all the way. Another thing, be careful with symbology or classification colors, because a lot of people are colorblind, or basically your colors won't look nice based on what application they're in. So that's a newspaper article from the Washington Post. And as you can see, they didn't choose their colors very well, because I can't tell who voted for Obama and who voted for Romney. Because they're all the same color. So those are two tools there, one for color blindness and one just to get color palettes that look nice or will work on black and white or work for people who have different types of color blindness. But that magazine art, that newspaper print is just, wow, that's so bad. That's just a terrible map. So that is all about classification and mouth issues. Are there any questions or comments on that? Because that is a big topic, and it's a topic that gets thrown around not only in technical discussions, but also in ethical discussions in GIS. Anat, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, thank you for asking.
Okay. Arya, yeah.
I just wanted to know how often would we run into the types of problems we mentioned.
This melt problem, anytime you aggregate data, it's everywhere. And that's what makes it so tricky, is because it is, you know, we use census data at census tracts. We use it at census blocks, and so sometimes it's defined for you. But I think it's always just important to state, you know, what you're saying. You know, using census blocks, this is the correlation that we found between, you know, two different things. Classification also is a pretty regular problem. That one is a little easier to just fix by feel than the mouth problem is. So yeah, these are things to watch out for. Unfortunately, they're and it makes you think about, you know, how truthful are the maps that you consume, because of problems like these, it's not possible to get things that are always true the exact same way. So sensitivity testing and getting other people to look at your classification and see what impact that they come away with, or what conclusion they come away with, are two good ways to do that.
Okay.
Now we're going to talk about attribute tables. So we're going to kind of totally shift gears here. We'll talk about this abstractly again, and then maybe we'll go into QGIS and take a look at it. Attribute tables. So in any vector data set that you click on, you can open up the attribute table by right-clicking on the layer and clicking Open Attribute Table, like you see on the left. There's a lot of different things you can do in an attribute table. The main thing that the attribute table does is it shows you all of your features and all the fields you have with attributes about those features. So it's a big spreadsheet, basically. And I don't know about you, but I love spreadsheets, so this is okay with me. Four main things we're going to talk about. One of them is selecting features. Selecting features is what's being done on the right there. Editing attributes, so changing those attributes in the table. Making new fields with attributes for each feature. And then also calculating attributes, sometimes combined with creating fields, where you can use tools to calculate new fields and attributes using fields that you already have. So at the top of each attribute table, there is a toolbar, like you'll see in the next couple of slides. Different things on that toolbar are highlighted based on what you have active. So sometimes you won't, they're all, I tweaked things around so they were all colored on this toolbar, but oftentimes they are not all colored. These ones you can use without turning editing on, because you're not editing. So these are your selection options. And if you go across there, they are select by expression. There's select inverse, and there's deselect features. Just simple. There's sorting selected features where you can bring all the selected features to the top. You can move them around, or you can zoom to them. And then at the bottom left of the attribute table, there's also an option to filter features. This is one of several ways to filter the features, but those are the options available there. Editing attributes and creating fields. So if you want to edit anything in an attribute table, you have to turn the toggle edits button on. And that's that little pencil to the left. You can turn that on, and then there are a couple options to edit. You can either click directly on cells and just type the new value. You can use this quick edit bar, which is usually underneath all of these icons, where you can change all of a particular field to a new value, or just the features that you have selected, you can turn to a new value all at once. That's really nice for when you have 3,000 plus features. Or you can create and calculate a new field. And those are the options over on the right. They are new field, delete field, calculator. And then once you're done making edits, you need to save your edits, which is, again, that little floppy disk over on the left. Within the field calculator, you have options to create new fields or update existing fields. What one you choose is dependent on, just your operating preference and how you want to add things in. And then for calculating new fields, you have an expression box where you can type in QGIS expressions to give you different values for the field that you're calculating. And then you have expression operators, which will give you a whole bunch of different mathematical operators, as well as you can select fields that you already have in your attribute table. A little bit more about selection. So conceptually, there's a couple different options for selection. There's spatial operators like next to, within, intersects with. There's Boolean operations like or, and, or not. And there's set algebra, which are mathematical relationships between selections. Some of these are accessible from the attribute table, and some of them are not. So I have, in the next couple of sessions, we're going to go over a bunch of different tools. I have here on the slides where those tools are located, or where you can consistently find them, because sometimes you can find them somewhere varies based on what you have turned on and whatnot. All of these can be located by searching in the processing toolbox. Pretty easy to find them. You can select by attributes, expressions, location, or distance. And then there are extract versions that just will select and carry to a new layer all the things you selected. So sometimes that's a faster way to do it. They're worded the same: extract by attribute, extract by expression. So they're pretty much, for vector selection, they're pretty much what they sound like. So attribute, you can select by a value. Expression, type in an expression for a regular expression, sometimes is what's used for that. Select based on an expression. You can select on location. So you can say, find me, select all the things that have a particular relationship to the reference material. So all the things that don't intersect with this particular layer. Find me all the things in the second layer that have that relationship. Then there's select within distance, which will select everything in a layer within distance from a reference feature. Now, what units you use for distance is going to be dependent on your coordinate reference system, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Raster analysis. Again, I'm not going to talk as much about these, but there are similar tools you can use for raster analysis where you can say, I want to select all the cells or raster areas that follow particular rules. There's also a selection toolbar that you can get at the top, which will again give you those options. So you can select by different shapes, which is where the mouse is right now. You can select by expression, different ways to deselect things. And then the third one that has that little pin icon is selecting by distance or location. So those are kind of the click options. I think that is the actual material, but not. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. So, for example, if I want to select a specific tract, like a census tract, and I have somewhere the shape files that describe all the different tracts, is there a way to call up a shapefile as your selector?
You mean like the layer?
Yeah, either the layer or a specific just GeoJSON that demarcates the area.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit not clear what you're asking.
So I don't want to draw the selection like the polygon. I want to bring it up from a file.
Yeah, I don't think there's a direct way to
Okay. Yeah, I've never found it. That's why I'm asking.
do that. No. And maybe why it
Okay.
confused me, because I was like, no, that's not a thing. So I'll show
I
you.
was just thinking that there's tricks that Cole knows that I don't,
No, and
which is
well,
entirely
the
possible.
other thing I can think of is that like sometimes you click and you get the thing from the wrong layer. So there's no way to say, oh, I want the thing from the particular layer without selecting the layer first. Let me find my QGIS. So here's something. Can everybody see this okay? I will take
Yeah, I
that
can see it.
as a yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is something I was working on like 5 minutes before class started. I'm also always trying to learn new tools in QGIS. So as far as I understand, this is a region in India. And so I'll show you some of those attribute. So up here, I don't know.
Oh, maybe we're not seeing it. So we're still seeing your slide deck, but it's in the
Okay, hold on a minute.
editing form.
How about now?
Yeah.
That's better. Okay. I don't remember if you can see the mouse. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I don't remember. I forget how that works in Zoom. So over here on the left, this toolbar, which you can find via toolbars, it's the selection toolbar. So I can make that go away. Toolbars. Selection. In here we have, you can select by polygon, freehand by radius. So if I want to just say select features, sometimes you get to click on the border. Let's see, I can click on different features. You can select, see by value, expression, invert, deselect. And then this is select by location, select within distance. You can find all those selection tools right there. You can also find them over in this processing toolbox by just searching select by, like here they all are, attribute, expression, location, distance. So let's open up the attribute table for this file. And you can see all the attribute tables. So let's see. So this one up here is the toggle. for the editing, right? So I turn that on, and you'll see these other tools pop up. So I can say, I can just click on a thing, I can change that to, I don't know, 9, right? Change that back because I don't want to mess up my thing. But and then you can hit save when you're done. You can also edit particular fields. So say I want to say for census code, I want to say all, and you can also control click, and you can select multiple units directly, or shift click, and it'll select the range. It's just like in a lot of different programs. Now I could say update selected. So say I want to change all of the census codes to 3. And you would say update selected. Now watch that census code. Boom. Now they're all 3. Now I don't want to save that. I'm not going to save this when I'm done. Again, tools you can use. If I select this one right here, and I say I want move selected features to top, now they'll move up there. You can pan map to selected rows, zoom map to selected rows to make this smaller. So I can zoom to that feature. Now say for each of these, I wanted to calculate a new field that was, well, I don't know what that means, it doesn't really matter what. That's open field calculator. This will give me that calculator box. So I can say I want a new field. I want that field to be called new field. And I would like it to be, oh geez, I don't know. We'll just give it a number this time. I'd like it to be 1,000. So now it's giving me a new field. It only filled it for the one I had selected. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. Now if I do it again, I say that's what I want it to be. I create a new field. Boom, there's my new field. So there's a couple of options in creating new fields that are specific to data type. I'm not going to talk about that. If you have trouble with joins, there's sometimes those are reasons for things. If I hit exit and I hit, you can also access toggle from this menu bar, and I hit toggle editing, change layers, no, discard. I can also show you, so we'll go to the vector properties box, right click on layer properties. Here's my vector layer. So I can hit single symbol, categorized. It's a single symbol. They're all going to be the same. Categorized, I can say, let's go based on a particular value. You'll give them all different colors. Or if you had classifications that were like, some of the districts had the number 1, some had number 2, some had number 3. You could say, I want all the ones that are 3 based on that field to be the same color. Then there's graduated, where you can say, and categorized. So the graduated one is where you start to run into this equal count, equal interval. There's natural breaks, pretty breaks, standard deviation. So, you can select what you want here. It would be good if I was doing this with a data set that actually had numbers. Because there's no values, but you can, again, choose what value it's based on. You can choose what color, what's called a color ramp, your gradient. You can choose how many classes you have. You can also, any of these, you can classify, you can unlink or link class boundaries. So there's a whole bunch of different options. And sometimes it's just fun just to play around with stuff until you get something that you're like, hey, that looks good. And if you can back it up with reasoning that's like, well, it makes sense that I'm using equal count or whatever, and it looks nice and it'll work for people who are colorblind, and it portrays the right idea across, then you get something that looks good. I think that is. I think that's everything. Wow, okay, that was a lot of different stuff. Any major questions or minor questions or thoughts that you have?
My main thought is let's try it out.
Yeah. How would we like to do that? Let me.
So,
I'm just thinking about data sets I have that have stuff that don't have to be joined.
You want us to download and follow along with this?
So yeah, there's not really anything to download. This just happened to be what I had up on my screen.
Alright, cool. Do you want us to still follow along though?
I hope
well,
you
I
guys
think
follow along.
everybody has gotten the Bellevue sidewalk data, right?
From the Dropbox?
Right. I don't think we used Dropbox. We used maybe Google. It was
Yeah,
somewhere.
it might
Do you
be.
have that project, Cole?
I have it. I don't know where I would, if there's a way to publicly share the link though.
Oh, we shared that data via email. I think I sent it around. It was a
Oh, crap.
GeoJSON.
Yeah, I have that data.
All right, let me try to find that because
No worries.
I'm sure it's in here somewhere.
Well, maybe Sanat wants to do a demo that we will all help you with. If you have your QGIS open.
Yeah, I could do that.
Cool.
Sure, yeah, that'd be cool.
Mm,
Great.
yeah.
All right, so is that your
Yeah.
The homepage,
okay.
new empty project. So we're just gonna play around with some things.
Let me just check if I have the Bellevue sidewalk data downloaded.
I did say it referred to the open sidewalks data, so somewhere over there.
Maybe it's in my downloads. Okay, I gotta find it. Maybe I'll just re-download it from the email you sent out. 1 second. Okay. I have it downloaded.
Cool. So let's uh you're gonna so I usually go into the vector
mhm.
submenu, but how would you upload that?
Oh, me? I thought, isn't it from the Open Data Source Manager?
Yep.
You could do
You can
that
go to
too.
browser and uh, okay, I just downloaded it. I might have to,
What was the name? I forgot. We called it
I think it was just Bellevue Sidewalk.
Bellevue. Yeah.
So I have it in my
Oh, yeah.
downloads.
Was it the one called OpenStreetMap?
Just got that far.
Probably not. Oh,
There it
there it
is.
is. Cool. It's populated behind you. Awesome.
Sweet.
Okay, so now you can turn on the selection, the feature selection.
So I see.
How would I do that?
So your toolbar.
Oh, good. Yep.
Okay. You can either go up on the top. There's that selection toolbar to the right,
Mm-hmm.
right there, or you can go into the processing toolbox. That's good enough.
Okay, so if I click on this
Yep, it'll give you the options.
and then select features, right?
Yep, if you want to select individual features that way. Otherwise, you can select by shapes there too. So,
Okay, so I'll try individual.
yep. So it'll just click on one. I don't think you clicked on anything.
Do I have to do something like this?
That's another way to do it, is you can drag, so you see this will highlight in yellow.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
So there's a couple different ways, like that way.
Yeah, I'll just try taking a larger chunk.
Yeah, just select a big.
So then that's the select by
Yep. Yep, he's just selecting by
polygon.
shape right now.
Mhm.
So
Okay, cool.
so go to the next one over and hit the little down arrow. Select by value. Try that. So you can give it a field with a particular value. So a lot of these, you might have to look at the attribute table to know what fields, have what information in them.
Right.
Just hit the X, just exit out of that one.
Oh, I would have done show in table, right?
Oh, can you do that?
Is that an option?
Yeah.
Show and table. That's right.
So it shows you what you have selected right now based on the previous selection you made.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, it looks like, could we have really selected in that small area 12,000 elements?
No, there's 12,000 in the whole data set. Selected 248.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see that. Sorry, I missed that. Thank
So you might want to deselect your selection before.
Okay.
So you can move it again. Oh, wait, nope, you don't want to delete. You gotta go up to the selection toolbar again. Move over two more.
Oh, here. Okay.
Yep, deselect from all layers.
There we go.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
So we only have 2 fields in this one. Is that the case?
That is odd because we had width and incline on these, which is why I was thinking we would be able to do some kind of like selection by value of all the ways that were of a certain elevation. So I'm a little perplexed by what we're seeing, but I believe it.
Yeah, it looks like there's maybe only 2 fields.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so maybe a different set of data, just because this is going to be hard to do any selection by value. My hope was like to select a certain area and then be able to do the classification, say by 3 bins or something like that. But
Nothing to classify here. So
what's that?
There's nothing to classify. There's nothing.
No, not in this case, but I was hoping to do it on incline. So if we have the data that actually has the elevation change for each sidewalk,
Yeah,
let
let
me
me look.
try to find that information. What's that?
Let me look. I might have it. No, I have that one. The one we just.
How about we start with that example in our next meeting so that we'll have and we'll send out the data when I get a handle on it.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be, and also the lab that I think is due is on the attribute table in selection, so that will help too because there's a good data set in there. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll have the data ready for the example next time.
Should I stop sharing then, or?
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
good. Unless you have a different data set that would actually give us the ability to do some kind of selection by value, which is
Yeah,
all
I
I
don't
was
think
hoping to
so.
demonstrate. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, well, we'll open with that next time. Cool. Are there any questions? And thank you for sharing your screens.
No worries.
Any questions out there? All right. Well, if no one had, oh, we're like 1 minute shy of time, so that's good. We look forward to getting your responses to the project proposals tonight. It sounds like there are not going to be changes necessarily to the groupings. I'd love to see more pairings because it does give you leverage. So please do that. Thank you guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.